Welcome everyone to the third and last webinar of 2025 Spring Series on socially engaged arts and advocacy in urban context. My name is Deniz Ünsal. I'm one of the moderators of today's webinar, and I'm logging in today from the ancestral lands of the Lekwungen speaking people, Songhees and Swepsum nations and families, otherwise known as Victoria, BC. I invite my colleague and partner Taiwo to introduce himself.
Hi everyone, my name is Taiwo Folabi, and really happy to be doing this alongside Denise. I'm dialing in from Regina, is the homeland of Nahiyawak, Anishinaabeg, Dakota, Lakota, and the homeland of the Métis nations. And I know that when it comes to land acknowledgement, it's something we do in Canada now for many of our colleagues joining the call who are not familiar with our Canadian culture. But I think also to put that in context is that this series really speaks about cities. It speaks about places. It speaks about histories and our histories. It speaks about the practices, particularly artistic practices and socially engaged practices that exist in these spaces. And so we're constantly challenging ourselves to really ask questions that are critical to better understanding the history of where we are right now, and what are the kind of initiatives, whether it's rebellious, resistance, initiatives that are really pushing the edge and really asking questions that can help us to be a better people and be better stewards of our cities and places. I'm the director of the Center for Social Engaged Theatre at the University of Regina, and I'm really excited about this last series. So over to you, Dennis.
Thank you, Taiwo. So let us give a brief framework for this webinar series before we invite our speakers. So it's part of an initiative that aims to build a community of practice and a network of researchers, artists, and art managers on socially engaged arts in non-Western urban contexts. And through a series of explorative, creative, critical activities, collaborative activities, we aim to document global voices, discuss and share experiences, knowledge, and perspectives. And you can find more about our initiative on our webpage. I'll share it in a second. And so as researchers, both Taiwo and I, as researchers and educators, our ongoing connections and relations with multiple urban environments, places we come from, we lived in, we studied, we work in, urge us to expand our attention beyond our current locations in Canada. And so this webinar series focuses on socially engaged arts and artists and their engagement within non-Western urban contexts with different urban and social issues, from migration to gentrification to displacement, environmental issues, political oppression, social inequality. And by listening to the work of those who study, research socially engaged arts, or artists who engage in social issues, we can document and amplify alternative narratives, identify strategies for structural and policy transformation, and advocate for more inclusive societies and cities. So the initiative has this aim, and these webinar series are just explorative places where we hear different researchers and artists working. A few words about the webinar program. We'll hear 4 speakers today. Each will speak for 15 minutes. And then we plan the Q&A after the last speaker for about 15-20 minutes. And so as you listen, you can type your questions in the chat and we'll read them during the Q&A. We hope to finish by 10:30 a.m. PST. As you see, the webinar is recorded and it will be shared on our webpage. You'll also find recordings of other webinars there too. So we hope to build a kind of digital archive collection as this initiative unfolds. Okay, so I'll let the speakers know when they have 5 minutes left. And having said that, now I'm pleased to introduce Begüm Özden Fırat. She's a professor at the Department of Sociology at Mimar Sinan Fine Arts University in Istanbul. And currently she's a visiting scholar at Columbia University's Sakıp Sabancı Center for Turkish Studies. Welcome, Begüm. Looking forward to listening to you.
Thank you, Deniz. Thank you so much. You can hear me, right?
Yes, we can. Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Deniz and Taiwo, for organizing this this seminar series and inviting me to participate in this, I think, like refreshing project. I'm delighted to be here and looking forward to listen to the next presentations. I should start by saying that my talk today departs in several ways from other contributions in this webinar series. Firstly, when I say socially engaged art throughout my talk, I refer to what has been often referred to as community-based practices. I think there's a, you more or less mean that in the seminar. And I have in mind those projects developed in collaboration with marginalized communities, aiming to generate social empowerment through artistic processes. Secondly, rather than analyzing individual projects, I will offer a critical historical periodization of such practices, such socially engaged practices from the 1990s to the present, and I hope to trace their transformation alongside broader political, institutional, and aesthetic shifts. So, while my reflections are informed by the socio-political context of Turkey, where I'm coming from, I hope the questions I raise will speak to a wider set of global dynamics. So my arguments will unfold into intertwined trajectories. First, I will analyze the rise of socially engaged arts or its practices in the 1990s and early 2000s within a liberal, well, rather liberal political context marked by the expansion of civil society discourses and the institutionalization of identity-based movements, and plus a dramatic increase in funding from the global north. So in this period, contemporary art institutions presented themselves as progressive spaces for participation and dialogue, even as they absorbed these practices into managerial frameworks. Simultaneously, global social movements, such as the alter-globalization movement of the 1990s, profoundly shaped the political imaginaries of artists, giving rise to collective practices rooted in solidarity, reciprocity, and collaboration. Then, secondly, I will turn to post-2011 moment, shaped by the simultaneous rise of global uprisings and simultaneous rise of authoritarian populist regimes and the strategic deployment of culture wars. So in this new political climate, the notion of community, once seen as a counterpoint to neoliberal atomization, has been reconfigured as an instrument of governance. Rather than dissolving communities, authoritarian populism mobilizes communities as moralized, homogenized units that obscure class conflict and deepen social polarization. So in this conjuncture, I argue, socially engaged art finds itself at a critical crossroads. While practice of collaboration and participation remain vital, they also face the risk of enclosure, complicity, or even depolitization. So this moment, right this moment, demands that we rethink the language, frameworks, and assumptions that underpin socially engaged art. What does it mean to build community under conditions in which community itself has become a totalizing populist force? What new aesthetics and political forms might resist this capture and reinvent the terms of collective imagination? So, a little bit of historical background. Socially engaged art, as we know it now, emerged as a significant cultural formation during the 1990s and early 2000s, and it was shaped by specific political and institutional conditions. So during this formative period, the rise of participatory, dialogical, and collaborative aesthetics was closely linked to the expansion of liberal democratic imaginaries, well, liberal democratic. This was a time when civil society was being valorized, identity-based movements were gaining institutional support and recognition, and the so-called social turn in art reflected a desire to move beyond the autonomy of the artwork towards more relational and process-oriented practices. Crucially, this emergence took place within a relatively liberal political environment, particularly in the global north. Contemporary art institutions operated under the discourse of inclusion, diversity, and institutional critique. At the same time, these institutions benefited from an influx of funding that specifically targeted socially oriented, collaborative, and participatory art. International foundations, cultural councils, and EU programs channeled significant financial support to socially engaged art initiatives, especially those operating in the global south. However, this era also witnessed the rise of counter-globalization movements, which offered a different kind of political horizon, a political horizon that was rooted in transnational solidarity and anti-capitalist critique. The alter globalization movement envisioned community not as a fixed identity or some sort of like bounded group, but as a dynamic site of solidarity, forged through shared struggles against neoliberal globalization and its dispossessive logics. This conceptual shift did not merely inform artistic practice, it reoriented it. The critique of neoliberalism's commodification of life, the erosion of public institutions, and the fragmentation of communities found expression in art that sought to restore the social bond. Artists formed collectives, built temporary infrastructures, initiated dialogical encounters, and collaborated with local communities, not to produce aesthetic objects, but to generate processes of social transformation. Yet, as these practices were increasingly folded into the art world and absorbed into institutional infrastructures, tensions emerged. Participation, it was said, became aestheticized. Collaboration became, again, it was criticized as a form of managerialism. The very vocabulary of engagement began to circulate within regimes of cultural policy, urban development, and global philanthropy. And the influx of funding from the global north, while materially very enabling, risks reorienting these practices toward project-based outputs. So the desire to do good through art, we realized, could easily align with soft power strategies, neoliberal urban policy, or humanitarian discourse. So in this formative or early period, socially engaged art moved within a double bind. On the one hand, it opened up radical possibilities for rethinking art's social role. On the other hand, it was constrained by the liberal institutional frameworks and funding logics that supported it. It is within this contradiction that we must situate the pre-2011 trajectory of socially engaged art, a trajectory that will be profoundly reconfigured in the wake of the global uprisings that followed. So this is the second phase. Remember the cycle of uprisings that began in 2011 and we're still going on in one way or another. So this cycle of uprisings, such as Tahrir, Puerta del Sol, Zuccotti Park, or Gezi, they mark this decisive shift in the spatial politics of protest, where urban space emerged not merely as a backdrop, but as a central terrain of struggle against the commodification of life under neoliberalism. Squares were occupied as symbolic and material challenges to the privatization of public life and the fragmentation of the social. Yet as these occupations receded, many movements shifted their scale. So they relocated their energies to the everyday fabric of urban neighborhoods. So in this turn, the neighborhood was reimagined not simply as a geographical unit, but as a political space. So the neighborhood has been understood as a site where practice of solidarity, care, and mutual aid could and should, maybe, reorganize social life from below, particularly in communities under the threat of displacement and dispossession. So this shift also marked a pivotal convergence between socially engaged art and grassroots activism, both of which increasingly started treating the neighborhood and the community as the primary site of political intervention. Artists began organizing together with activists within local communities, particularly in precarious or contested urban spaces. In this new era, the shifting boundary between politics and aesthetics that defined the 1990s was not erased, but subsumed to a different logic. Socially engaged art practices did not vanish, but instead they shifted more decisively into the sphere of activism, often abandoning the art world's institutional frameworks. So this political and artistic turn toward the neighborhood actually overlapped with a strategic recalibration of governance under authoritarian populist regimes. Faced with growing discontent fueled by aggressive urban transformation projects, authoritarian regimes reinvented the local as a site of consent making. While urban transformation continued to function as an engine of capital accumulation in urban scale, new spatial strategies were deployed to manage the contradictions such capital accumulation produced. So this included these new forms of governing the neighborhood or the community, what we can call like a micropolitics of the neighborhood, which relies on the revitalization of traditional networks of social control, the reinforcement of religious and kinship-based solidarities. For example, through cultural centers, municipal initiatives, and architectural interventions, the state or the authoritarian populist regimes sought to reconstitute community as a stable, moralized, and governable entity. So it is in this context the discourse of Kulturkampf, or culture war, became central. A dichotomy was produced between the so-called indigenous national people and the westernized secular elite. In that context, the neighborhood, both as a metaphor but also as a material space, became a battlefield in this war. Community, once fragmented by neoliberal ideology, is now celebrated, but in a very homogenized and exclusionary form. Now the community serves as a glue to hold together a moralized society, mystifying class conflict under the banner of lifestyle and cultural identity. So this transformation diverged sharply from the earlier critiques of neoliberalism that had animated socially engaged art back in the 1990s and early 2000s. When Thatcher had famously declared there was no such thing as society, today authoritarian populism revives community, but only as a disciplinary and ideological form. So herein lies the danger. As emancipatory movements retreat, and as the language of community is being appropriated by regimes of control, socially engaged art may unintentionally reproduce the very forms it once resisted. The potential emphasis on proximity, familiarity, and cultural belonging can devolve into a form of communitarian closure, and not a kind of the creation of a kind of community shaped not by solidarity but by sameness or similarity of lifestyles. So here's my conclusion and my concluding questions. If socially engaged art initially emerged as a response to the atomization and commodification of life under neoliberalism, it now operates within a transformed political terrain. In the present conjuncture, which is characterized by the global rise of authoritarian populist regimes, the very meaning of community has shifted. Once conceived as a counterpoint to neoliberal individualism, community increasingly functions as a vehicle for cultural closure, social homogenization, and political containment. What was once a site of resistance has now become, in many contexts, a terrain of capture. So in the current era of authoritarian populism, the conditions that once rendered socially engaged art a relevant and vital practice have undergone a profound transformation. Terms such as diversity, equality, and gender are not only delegitimized, but actively criminalized. Cultural institutions increasingly capitulate to neo-fascist narratives under the guise of neutrality, and transnational funding streams that once sustained progressive artistic work are rapidly evaporating. So against this backdrop, one is compelled to ask, does socially engaged art still carry a political force, or has it become a relic of a liberal moment now definitely closed? What forms might artistic practice assume in order to remain politically resonant in an age even when the language of justice is being hollowed out? So these are the questions. They do not actually seek for resolution, but these questions, I hope, insist on sustained and critical engagement. Perhaps what is needed now is not a nostalgic return to the vocabularies of past radicalisms, but a reckoning with the altered landscape of cultural production and political struggle. The crisis of community may also be a generative break, a moment to reimagine the coordinates of collective practice and to explore the aesthetic forms through which new political imaginaries might emerge. Thank you for your patience.
Begüm, thank you so much. You're really pointing to a very critical moment and really raising the issue that the context is very important in which we define these words, terms, relations. And so thank you so much. I think we'll have lots of questions and discussion. I took many notes. Thank you. I'll quickly move to Işil Eğrikavuk. So Işil is a Turkish-born international artist and academic based in Berlin. She's currently a postdoctoral researcher at KT Hamburger Research Center Global Disconnect at Ludwig Maximilian University in Munich. Welcome, Işil.
Hello, thank you for inviting me, and very nice to see everyone. Yeah, so I'm gonna share once my screen in 1 second. You can see it, right? Yeah. So as Deniz introduced, I'm an artist, and mainly I studied performance art and also focusing on community art practices or socially engaged arts, or specifically I referred in my thesis as dialogue-based art practices. So in my performance work, I also have worked with many different communities and engaged with different mediums, and together collaboratively worked with communities to lead them to make work together. I question a lot what it means to work collaboratively, what it means to co-create together. And I'm really happy to hear Begüm's presentation, because my PhD thesis also focuses on the current protest movements around the world, especially the Gezi Park protests in Turkey, which is now 10 years ago, and the kind of collaborative practices that were played out, collaborative and performative practices within the protest. But anyway, today I'm here to talk about a project that's actually a garden, which I'm still running. I have been in Germany since 2017, in the last 8 years, and I've taught at the Berlin University of Arts. So this project actually starts from a very personal experience, and it became a pedagogical research space and a garden, and I will talk about it. So this is our garden now. It's actually only 4 beds that we have in the backyard of our university building, but it's also my classroom. It's also our social space with the students. It's also our community and our solidarity with non-human beings. And I will start with this slide. This is the building I work at. This is the Art University in Berlin. But we are not exactly in the main building. I'm in the communication faculty. And we are a side building somewhere a bit more distant, on the distant outskirts of the city. I show this image in my presentation to begin with because the building is beautiful. It used to be a school building before. But it has a different meaning for me, and I will quote Sarah Ahmed and her description of brick walls and what a brick wall could mean. And she writes about the brick wall, is that also a metaphor for an organization or a neighborhood or a street or an institution in this case, where it is hard to access, it's hard to get into. Even though you are maybe part of it, but you have been excluded from it for so long. And as a Turkish native who migrated to Germany recently in the last years, I also have experienced that working in this brick building. I quickly, after coming here, I noticed that I was the only non-German person in my faculty. And at that time, I didn't speak German, although I was learning intensely. I was doing intensive German courses. I noticed also that all the meetings that I had to attend and all the bureaucracy, all the writings that I need to be, and committees that I had to be part of as a teaching staff here, they were in German. And so I felt actually outside, and I felt like an other. I felt othered in this environment because of my lack of German at that time, and also the lack of diversity in our department. So this personal experience have actually led me to think about otherness and forms of otherness that both I was experiencing and I also was practicing in my artistic work. So this is the view from my office that looks at the backyard of the university, but this is before our garden was established. So there were actually 2 reasons. One was this personal experience that I felt othered, but the second part was there was no social space in our university building for the students to come together to socialize. We still don't have a cafeteria or any kind of place that the students could meet each other outside of the class. So I noticed this lack of lack of space. And I started to think, okay, how it would be if we had a garden here, if we started a garden project in the backyard, because it's also seemed quite unused at that time. And I started reading about inclusive ecology, which basically talks about the hierarchies within ecology and practices related to ecology. And comparing to hierarchies within also the kind of practices that I am doing as an artist. And another thing I'm going to refer when I started my research was about intersectionalist ecology. And this is also about seeing the issues related to climate change and the climate crisis, not only as single issues, but linking them to other social, political, geographical current important topics. So with that, I decided to offer the garden project into our curriculum, into our university curricula. And with these questions, how to create a living research space within the university that gives voice to those who are unrepresented and are often silenced. How can we foster an intersectionalist understanding of the ecology within our university? And linking this to issues of diversity and biodiversity. And also, how can we conduct the research? And also, how can we create a classroom that is beyond this monocultural representations of the university system? So with that said, I offered the garden as a class, as I said, and I only had one student in the beginning that signed up for the class. But that's one good thing, that in a German system, you can actually start the class even if you have one student. So with this student of mine, actually, we worked on the bureaucracy for 1 year to get the necessary permissions. And in the end, we were allowed this marked space, as you can see on the screen, to start our garden. And in the third semester, actually, we have some funding from the university to buy the materials and to build our beds. Sometimes I also get asked why we didn't do it on the ground, and that's because the university, again, the German bureaucracy, did not allow us for the threat of asbestos in the soil. So we had to make our beds. But then there comes the question: what would be the name of this garden, and also what we would grow there? With the students, we came together to create this classroom, to start a community, and also to create the social space. But I also explained them how I was feeling this, as I explained to you here today, that this feeling of otherness, which actually made me feel quite small, not being able to express myself in the way I wanted to, and my potential. So I talked to them a lot about how it was for them to feel other in different conditions, coming from different positions, different backgrounds. And during our talks, we decided to also see that as a solidarity, or maybe as a common characteristic with the plants. So we decided to then name it as the Other Garden. And during our research also on especially inclusive ecology, we wanted to look at what are the others of the ecology and the plant world, actually. And so this is from our first day of transplanting. This is 2022, and now we are actually in our 4th year. So what are we growing there? We are growing wild plants, or as known, weeds, which are quite important for creating an environment of biodiversity. And they're also the ones that are othered, mostly by the professional gardeners, because they can be quite invasive, and they can root a lot strongly in the soil. However, they actually attract bees and other species, so that they cause more biodiversity. And the kind of plants that we are growing there are neophytes, which mean they have come to Germany as migrant plants. So they came to Germany, these plants that are actually growing in Berlin already. So we didn't bring anything extra. They are plants that are growing on Berlin streets in different parts of the city. And they have arrived here through human influence some hundreds of years ago, some of them, through colonization or through war or through human travel, these kind of effects. And they have stayed. Some of the ones that we are growing are goldenrod, which is actually originating from North Africa, and whatever that would mean, originating. Or the arugula, that is more known. So we started with 8 different plants, but right now actually we probably, I'm assuming, have more than 20. And this is purslane, which is semizotu in Turkish, which also grows in Berlin, but not so much, not very common. So that's what this was 1 month after we planted first. And this is, I think, a couple more months later. So it quickly grows. And that's one thing about wild plants. They don't need much care. And so that we can easily let them be there without actually too much care work.
5 more minutes, Işil.
Fine, I'm about to finish. So what do we do in the garden other than gardening? We actually do artist talks there. This is from our first artist talk, where 2 of the university members were the participants, were the speakers. We have talks. We also make food there. One of my students, she knows a lot about how to work with wild plants and incorporate them into kitchen. And I also hold my classes there. So as I said, it also has changed my teaching practice a lot. I'm not going to talk so much about it, but it's also about being grounded. So we start the class with meditation. We do deep listening sessions. We do drawing sessions. We work with the soil. We work with the space, and we do performances, our different media, whatever the students are focusing on. They use the class practices with their work. And this is also from one of the class exercises. And I also bring this experience to my own artistic practice. So it all started, maybe I should have said it in the beginning, sorry, I forgot, that actually my experience at first being othered was feeling like a plant. In Turkish, we sometimes say it like ot gibi hissettim, which is, the correct translation would be, I feel like a wild plant, which would be, not fitting into somewhere. So I do workshops and use this also into my own artistic practice. And finally, I would like to thank my current students who are part of this or who have been part of this, because without them, I would never be able to do this project and bring it to its current condition. Even though I'm right now doing my fellowship in Munich, the class is still happening without me. So that also opens an eye for me how these practices, because this is something that I was already thinking in community art practices, how they can become, or if they should ever be sustainable. And this actually has taught me something. And also it also has taught me that I don't always have to work with humans, that how actually human-centered I have been in my own practice of community arts, and has brought up a new way of looking for, multi-species, more than human or beyond human practices within the community arts. So thank you.
Thank you, Işil. Thank you. This was a nice presentation, thinking about human and biodiversity, about agency of non-living things that we have around us and how they shape us and invite us for action too. So lots of inspiration. Thank you. Okay, so now I'm going to invite Minji Chun. Minji is a PhD candidate in history of art at the University of Oxford, specializing in Korean contemporary art. Minji is also, she works as an art critic, curator, and translator based in Seoul and Oxford. Thank you for joining us, Minji.
Thank you. Okay, I'll quickly try to share my screen. Okay. Hope this working well. Okay. Okay, it's all good right now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, yeah, well, thank you so much for a kind introduction and invitation as well. My name is Minji, and I'm going to present my case study on the Etubiebi protest, which took place in Seoul from 2022 to last year against the forces of gentrification and neoliberal urban redevelopment. And some of you might remember in Sun Park, one of the first speakers of this seminar series, she is the director of the art collective Listen to the City, and they played actually a very crucial role in this protest. And at first glance, this case may sound like a very local and isolated event, but it's actually part of a much longer tradition in Korea. Because political protests in the country have always propelled social transitions. So from the April Revolution of 1960 to the Gwangju Uprising for democratization in 1980, mass movement in Korea have marked a very popular response to authoritarianism and have catalyzed change through collective action. So these protests have not only altered political systems, but also transformed the public spaces of Seoul, turning them into sites for the renegotiation of power. And as you might have seen in the news, because of the recent martial law in Korea last December, streets, squares, and every urban landmarks in the city, they have come to symbolize the intersection of political activism and civic engagement. For instance, during the candlelight movement protest of 2016 to 17 as well, millions of citizens, they gathered in Gwanghwamun Square, which is located in the very city center of Seoul, to demand the impeachment of then President Park Geun-hye, transforming the space once again for both political dialogue and artistic expression. So the creative acts that characterize those protests, ranging from satirical pickets to cultural performances, they all reflect a very broader trend in Korea, where protests have evolved into platforms for artistic intervention. Against this backdrop, I will read the Etubiebi protest case as a contemporary manifestation as this tradition that deploys interventions and even more creative strategies. So what exactly happened before this protest began? So let me walk you through the timeline. At 3 a.m. on April 2022, a group of 70 men hired by the Seoul Central District Court conducted a violent and forcible eviction of Etubiebi, which is one of Korea's oldest pubs. This place, which had served the local community for decades, was more than just a drinking establishment. It's actually a cultural institution, a place where generations of locals and creatives had come together. But in 2018, Mansan, a brand that owns multiple pubs in the area and contributes significantly to the area's commercial dominance, they refused to renew this pub's lease, so sparking a legal dispute. So despite the repeated public outcry and calls to curb the growing monopoly of Mansan, which had acquired more than half of the 20 pubs in the neighborhood, the company just remained unwilling to negotiate with the community. After this eviction, Mansan quickly just removed the Seoul Future Heritage or 100 Years store signs, erasing not only the physical space, but also the cultural memory associated with the pub. And to understand how this conflict became so charged, we need to place it within the longer history of urban redevelopment and gentrification in Seoul. Since the 1960s, under the military dictatorship of Park Chung-hee, who is another ex-president, Large-scale redevelopment projects in Seoul have displaced working class communities under the banner of modernization and economic growth, which means informal settlements were just cleared, and those who did not align with state-led visions of urban progress were pushed out as well. So from the 1980s onward as well, neoliberal redevelopment policies have continued this trend without sufficient institutional protections for tenants or local businesses. One emblematic case is Cheonggyecheon Restoration Project, launched in 2002 by then Seoul Mayor Lee Myung-bak. Although this was promoted as an eco-friendly initiative, it reinforced a long-standing cycle of displacement, a contagion of gentrification driven by capitalist urban policies. And among the many areas affected by these transformations, Uljiro near Cheonggyecheon has been a major focal point. So located along the Cheonggyecheon or Jongno-gu area, this district was originally developed as a commercial and industrial zone after the Korean War in the 1950s. The low-income urban residents built shanty towns and informal homes in the area, which later evolved into a very vital industrial hub, especially known for its metalworking and print shops. So over time, Uljiro also became indispensable to Seoul's artistic and creative economy. Artists and designers, they relied on its dense ecosystem of materials, skilled labor, and collaborative networks. But in 2018, the Seoul Metropolitan Government launched a comprehensive urban regeneration project, once again, aimed at revitalizing the district. But paradoxically, this project endangered the very workshops and small businesses that had shaped the area's character. So it was in this context that Listen to the City, alongside artists and researchers critical of urban planning policies, co-founded the Cheonggyecheon Anti-Gentrification Alliance as a platform for collective resistance and advocacy. So now going back to the eviction of the pub Etubiebi, a voluntary resistance movement began to protect the place. So together with the art collective Listen to the City, supporters of Etubiebi, they started together weekly, transforming the site into a space of artistic and communal resistance. In cooperation with many DJs or poets, activists, and citizens, the collective organized events at which they distributed flyers and shared poetry. So this artistic protest, illegally approved by the Seoul Metropolitan Government, provided a new model for contesting gentrification, one that merged illegal visibility and symbolic destruction. So I think this case represents an imbroglio between law and justice. Wanson's decision was grounded in the established legal order and the assertion of its inherent right. So it would be therefore unfair to label the company's behavior as just evil. Nonetheless, I think its actions prompt significant ethical concerns about the erasure of community spaces. So here, Jacques Derrida's idea might be helpful. He reminds us that just because something is legal doesn't mean it's just. So legal frameworks can be weaponized to enforce structural inequality, and the destruction of Etubiebi exemplifies how legality can sometimes stand in direct opposition to justice. And what makes this protest especially powerful is the way how they imagine resistance. So not through direct communication or confrontation, but through cultural and embodied practices. So throughout the protests from 2022 to last year, they hosted the mini concerts nearly every weekend at the former Etubiebi location. And during this event, the pub's owner would raise money for their legal fees by selling Etubiebi's renowned draft beer. And the Alliance created an Instagram account that highlights the history of the pub and continues to share daily gathering-related updates. And they also sell metal badges made by Cheonggyecheon-based craft people for a token price significantly lower than their production cost or market value. So, which means this pricing strategy turned the act of purchasing into a gesture of solidarity.
5 more minutes, Minji.
Okay, thank you. And plus the communal meal is a way to display unity and compassion as well. So in transforming this protest site into a space of conviviality and shared sustenance, the activists reduced gentrification while actively producing new forms of social relations and urban citizenship. And these are the photographs taken during my site visit in August and September 2022. And these are revealing that protest gatherings took place in very close proximity, I say less than 5 meters, to other pubs owned by Mansan. So this spatial arrangement creates a unique dynamic where the protest space overlaps with everyday social spaces. And due to this narrowness of the alley, visitors to other Mansan properties could be observed just casually humming and dancing to the music being played at the demonstration site. And this music thus created an experience that transcended the immediate context of the protest. And even those not directly involved in the protest become part of this collective experience, which can increase their awareness of and sympathy for the cause. And yeah, so since music has the potential to induce a collective effective phenomenon, this unplanned and accidental involvement of non-participants and bystanders becomes a distinctive aspect of the protest. It was not apparent that the concert producing the music was a demonstration against Mansan. So the protesters focused on arousing interest in gentrification rather than directly and vocally criticizing it. So by using music and performance, protesters evoke a form of soft power that can be more effective in changing hearts and minds than direct confrontation. So through my observation as one of the participants and maybe art historians, I discovered that this spontaneous environment motivates individuals to go beyond observing protests and take an active part in them. So this inherent entropy of the protests actually generates an improvised flow and amplifies its intensity. And spectators receive sensory stimuli from the performative circumstances. Their bodies can react with reinterpreted gestures and movement. And at the nexus of this protest and performance, people can facilitate a more visceral flow, which is the effect of somatic communication. During this process of embodiment, bodies acquire knowledge unconsciously and make involuntary movements. As further noted by the art historian Garrido Castellano, such performabilities can provide us with potential nodes for unexpected solidarities. So in this sense, a protest is not only a stage for expressing dissent, but a dynamic system within which participants co-create meaning and cultivate communal bonds through artistic engagement. And actually, last year, 2 years after its forced eviction, Etubiebi finally returned to Ujiro, even though it's not in its original building. But this relocation vividly shows that the impact of embodied resistance and the potential for urban reclamation. And the pub's re-establishment represent both a symbolic and material victory that affirms the role of creative solidarity in shaping the city's future. Okay, so this is the end. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Minji. It's good to hear that, this action actually resulted with the return of the space, apparently also a cultural space, a heritage space. Thank you for your contribution. Now we're going to move to Charles Etubiebi. Charles is a New York-based actor, artistic director of Theater Emissary International, and a registered member of the International Theater Institute. Charles received several awards. He has also nominations in acting. Welcome, Charles.
Thank you so much, Denise, and thank you, Taiwo, and everyone else who was presented. I found that very informative. Let me share my screen here. Let's start with the presentation. There we go. Let's give me a second there. All right. Can we see this?
Yes,
Yeah.
we can.
Okay, excellent. So I'm going to be talking about, I'm going to be looking at socially engaged art from the perspective as an African storyteller. I've titled this Rewriting the African Narrative in Global Storytelling. Now, just a quick introduction of who I am and what I do and where I work. Charles Etubiebi. I'm an actor, storyteller, and the artistic director of Theater Emissary International. Now, at Theater Emissary, we recognize the danger of a single narrative and are committed to ensuring that African stories are told by us, for us, while fostering a deeper awareness of who we were, that's our history, who we currently are, both on the continent and in the diaspora, and the potentials of who we can become, both on the continent and, of course, across the diaspora. At Theater Emissary, a little bit about who we are. We are a cultural center that utilizes art to educate, conscientize, and of course, create positive social change in society. And what we strive for in our vision is to be an innovative cultural center for nurturing and developing artists and artwork for social change. Our mission, which is something that we have over the years tried to establish by the works that we do, is to strengthen and nurture and also promote professionalism and best ethical practices and artistic excellence. Now, having said all of this, from the African perspective, it's very imperative that we tell our own stories. And the next slide is diving into why this is important. I found this very interesting because it's an African proverb that has various translations, but one of them would be this, which says, until the lion learns to write, every story will always glorify the hunter, which here alludes to the danger of a single narrative. Now, this in itself gives credit to the fact that there are multiple sides to every story, and until we learn the whole truth, the stories we hear are incomplete and often favor the perspective of the writer/storyteller. This is why, as Africans, it is imperative that we tell our own stories to ensure that we are being presented in the best light and repair the damage of years of colonialism that has brought, you know, the years of colonialism and how they painted the African image. Now, from my own personal perspective and from theater industry's perspective as well, we use art to challenge and drive social change. One of the outfits we have two of them. I'm going to touch a little bit on 54 silhouettes, move on to something else, and then come back to 54 silhouettes shortly. Now, in the play written by a colleague of ours, Africa Uko, I play the character who explores the tough choice between career development and cultural integrity. And this highlighting the power of socially engaged art. Now, stories like this are rooted in local struggles, and they have a global impact, and in also shaping narratives and empowering community. Because we believe that art is more than just an expression. It's more than just entertainment. It's also activism. If we don't tell our stories, others will. And it's time for us to redefine representation and wield art as a tool for change, which is one of the core values that we have in Theater Industry International. Now, apart from this, in order to also make sure that we wield art and we tell our own stories in the most productive way, one of the other projects as Theater Industry that we've worked on was a project called Script Lab, which was in 2021. But of course, because of COVID, certain things had gotten in the way and we never really actualized this. But this was one of those things that this is one of those projects that speaks to our work as artists in Theater Emissary. This was a program that it sought to pair upcoming African playwrights with established playwrights in a mentorship program where the playwrights themselves, the established playwrights, help to nurture the voices of these upcoming playwrights and help them produce their first play. And then we as Theater Emissary, with the connections that we have with some of the festivals around the world that happen, with our connections to the International Theater Institute, we get to connect these upcoming artists to festivals where their works will then have their premieres and breathe life into these works. And then, of course, propagate that African narrative of us telling our own stories. This was what Script Lab in 2021 was meant to establish. And hopefully we still have this in the works. So hopefully one of these days, when we have the right funding, we hope to still pick this up and run with it as well. And now moving on to 54 Silhouettes, which is one of the plays that we've been fortunate to produce. The play 54 Silhouettes first premiered at the NIPFest in Rio de Janeiro in 2018. And then we produced it again at the Lagos International Festival in 2019. And also in 2019 at the United Solo Festival in New York, where it won the award for Best International Show in 2019. It was also supposed to be part of the Pan-African Creative Exchange Program, which was a physical festival, but because of COVID, became a virtual festival. So we also featured the play there as well. That's just a little bit about the history and journey of the play itself. So about 54 Silhouettes. The play follows the journey of a Nigerian actor who finally lands his big break, and he has a role in a major Hollywood blockbuster alongside A-list stars. This is poised to catapult him into the career of his dreams, but there's a catch. Now, the film depicts Nigeria through a deeply negative lens. And when I say that, there are parts of the script that had wrestling matches with lions, a cannibal voodoo priest, portraying malnourished babies, child soldiers in Nigeria, like all these negative depictions of Nigeria from a Western perspective. And like I said, the film depicts Nigeria through a negative lens, reinforcing harmful Western narratives that paint Africa as a hopeless continent in need of rescuing by white saviors. Now, he's faced with a dilemma. Does he accept the role and step into fame, or does he walk away and risk losing everything he's worked for? I find this to be the dilemma of some of the African actors I have met here and some of the colleagues I have met here when I work. It's also something that is deeply seated inside of me, where when I work, I'm always asking myself the question, how does this work that I'm doing, how does this propel Africans? Because one of the biggest things that we believe in Nigeria is you're not a single entity. Whatever work you do, whatever work you do, whatever you put your name on, it reflects not just on you, but on the society and the family that you come from. Every Nigerian will tell you that one of the advices your parents give you before you leave your home, maybe let's say to school, or you're traveling on a journey, or you're going to represent the family in one way, is remember what family you come from. Remember whose child you are. These are some of the things that we carry within ourselves, and we're very conscious of the way we carry ourselves, not just in public, but also when we're alone with our own thoughts as well. Now, moving on to the journey and role of social engaged art. This is from a personal perspective. As a Nigerian and an African living in the US, one of the things that becomes very apparent as soon as you come here is how little knowledge the average American has about the cultures on the African continent. Now, I've met people who are very knowledgeable, which is very refreshing. But I feel that there then comes a point where if people don't know, you then have to educate them, which is why this is where we as African storytellers and contemporary griots come in to change the narrative with storytelling from the continent and the diaspora as well. Now, 54 Silhouettes seeks to change that narrative by educating the audiences about what it is to be African, our values, our rich intellectuality, the history and extensive rich cultural heritage as Africans. This is not only valuable to the audience, but also the African American who has endured unthinkable hardship and fought hard for theirs and the immigrant group's civil rights in the US.
5 more minutes, Charles.
Oh, thank you. There's also a misconception about socially engaged art being used. There's also a misconception between the African American and the African here in the US, especially in New York, where I've met a few, and we've had this conversation, which led me to actually work on a project, which I'm about to share, with a friend of mine, which actually addresses this theme. I should warn that there's some heavy use of language in what I'm about to play, so bear with me. This was one of those projects that addresses the issue of the tensions between Africans and African Americans. Let me just share this quickly. There it is. So again, apologies for the language. It's for educational purposes. Let's see.
It was 2 a.m. I was on my bike going home, and this motherfucker pulls me over and asks me if I'm sucking dude's dick in the park.
So you attacked a cop?
I didn't attack him. I challenged him to a fight, so he squared up.
This is exactly why my kids are not connected to your mother's side of the family.
Nigga, what?
It's not okay. You're fighting cops. You could have been arrested. You could have been dead. Called, you're black.
I fucking know. What's supposed to do differently?
Everything. You're messed up. Your entire mother's side of the family is messed up.
Chin, why do you hate us so much?
Look, I don't hate you, okay? But the culture, that I hate.
It's the same fucking thing!
It's not. Listen to me. We weren't raised like this, okay? It's not normal to fight cops. It's not normal to do crack. It's not normal to bring pedophiles around kids.
Why are you judging us? We never did anything to you.
Carl, I have
Daughter. Kelly.
all your nieces were raped by their mother's boyfriends. And y'all just sit there and act like it's normal. Well, I am done acting like it's normal.
You need to watch your fucking tone. Nigga, don't talk to me that way. I'm your fucking elder.
You are not my elder.
Fuck you! I should change your fucking diapers. I'm your fucking elder. I'm my father's elder. I'm everyone's fucking elder. I got like fucking 8 lifetimes of experience over you.
Igbo cultures, you are not.
Fuck that shit. I ain't Igbo. It must have that bullshit. You have to know boozy and shit because you got that job in Hollywood.
It is not about the job.
Let me
that
tell you
know.
something, okay? Stunts ain't real. The shit I do is real. The bullets and my fucking gun, those are real. Me making motherfuckers cry on the floor for their mama, that shit is real.
And that right there, that's my point.
Right. That was an excerpt from a movie titled It's Relative by a friend of mine and fellow filmmaker here, Nnamdi Nwosu, who is also Nigerian, but also has Nigerian descent, but was born and raised here. Moving on quickly, I think I have about 3 minutes more. This is something that this is a Chinese proverb that I found very helpful in talking about socially engaged art and the effect it has on people. This says, you know, he who does not know and does not know that he does not know is a fool. Shun him. He who knows not and knows that he knows not, he is simple. Teach him. This is where I really want to focus on. He who knows and knows not that he knows is asleep. Wake him up. That phrase right there is one of the phrases that I love because that is what socially engaged art and storytelling does to individuals. It helps us to educate, to conscientize, to also let people know who have the knowledge that this is important to society around us. Now, the impact of global storytelling. Let me rush through these because I've been excited to see some of the impacts of the African storytelling on the larger stage, especially here in New York. First, I'll start with Judge's African Braiding Hair. That's Jocelyn Bill's Judge's African Braiding Hair, which was on Broadway and explores the lives and resilience of the immigrant African woman in the US. Secondly would be Inua Elam's Half God of Rainfall, which masterfully blends Yoruba and Greek mythology, intertwining themes of love, basketball, and a powerful quest for retribution to weave a great narrative. This was at the New York Theater Workshop. Of course, Bala David's Woman King, which is a powerful retelling of the Dahomey warriors, of the Dahomey warrior General Nasika, who in 1823 led a team of all-female warriors to battle against the Oyo slavers. Her triumph not only marked a pivotal moment in history, but also earned her the legendary title of the Woman King. Now, from all these examples, it's clear that storytelling is not just a cultural expression which preserves our heritage, but it also is a powerful tool for activism in that storytelling has traditionally been used to challenge colonial narratives, slavery, appetite, and other forms of injustice by preserving counter-narratives and affirming African dignity. It's also a tool for empowerment, where it gives marginalized groups a platform not to only share their experiences and influence change, but also learn and use it as a tool for healing and reclaiming agency post-trauma and conflict. And of course, community building, where it nurtures a shared identity by preserving ancestral wisdom, cultural pride, and collective memory across generations. It's also fosters civic engagement and unity by creating space for dialogue around common struggles like displacement, inequality, and cultural erasure. Now, call to action. This is where we have to I saw this at a museum at the I saw this at the National Museum of the American Indian Museum, where Inshata Tuemba posted this in her Indian essay question. It says that the Indian, being a man and not a child or thing, merely an animal, as some of the would-be civilizers have termed him, fights for his property, liberty, and life. They call him a savage. But when the first settlers in this country fought for their property, their liberty, and their lives, they were called heroes. And when the Indian fighting this great nation wins a battle, it's called a massacre. But when the great nation fighting the Indian wins, it's called a victory. Now, this is important because if we do not tell our own stories, someone else will, and they may not tell it truthfully, which is why it's important for us as Africans to continue to support and to tell our own stories. Now, the question and considerations here is for the artist, how can I use my craft to create change? And for the industry professionals, how can we support authentic representation? Why is supporting authentic representation so important? Because by supporting authentic narratives, art offers genuine insight into different cultures and experiences, breaking down barriers of misunderstanding, which then leads to challenging the negative stereotypes, which then confront harmful stereotypes, encouraging audience to question their preconceived notions and biases, and then in turn leads to fostering empathy. By showing diverse perspectives, art can foster empathy and understanding, allowing viewers to connect with unfamiliar experiences. And I'm going to close with this closing statement that art is power. And as such, we must know what power we have and wield it wisely. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you for this engaging talk and sharing your work with us and how it relates to social change, transformation, self-representation, and authenticity.
Thank you.
We will now move to the Q&A, and I'll invite Taiwo to moderate the Q&A. And if you have questions, you can type in the chat, or you can just, well, I'll leave that to Taiwo how he wants to moderate it. Sorry.
Well, thank you so much for the presentations, and I'm trying to get everybody to to spotlight. So just give me a second here so that we can all see ourselves. Into my tech here. To spotlight.
I think we can all do that on our own screens, no?
Okay.
Yeah.
We can, why not?
Yeah. Gallery. Yeah.
To spotlight. Great. I think I just Minji's there. Waiting for one more person. Where is that? Is it okay? Oh, okay, great. So, like I said, thank you for your presentation. Really appreciate it. I think that Begüm, you started from giving us this historical background from a particular context, which is Turkish, and that historical analysis offers insight into some theoretical standing around the development of socially engaged art and the culture war and the realities of social engagement where it's being co-opted into the neoliberal practices and all that. And then we move into really specific examples from Ishil and how Ishil is using spaces, particularly within your university, and how that not just only changes the learning process, but also the teaching process, and really occupying space and really occupying space in meaningful ways. And then Minji kind of moved into the UGOB urban protest in South Korea, which is, again, these are examples of how people came together to be able to really to resist and in some regard serve as disobedience to the system, and not disobedience in a negative way, but really standing as a political resistance. And then Charles, you kind of took us on the journey around really how peculiar stories and storytelling has been used in these urban spaces from Lagos to New York, and how you're and the philosophical and ideological underpinnings that sponsors this kind of narrative of why you choose, whether it's the work you're doing with your theater company and the spaces that you're working, the reason why you're using storytelling to change those narratives. So I'm just kind of offering my own just kind of summary here. And I guess the first question my first provocation rather, that I want both of you to kind of weigh in on. I'll start with Begüm. I'm really thinking about socially engaged, the history of socially engaged art from a decolonial lens. And I know you came at it from a Turkish perspective. And I wonder if you want to speak to that, how that history might slightly change if we're looking at it from a non-Western perspective, because I'm also aware that many of our local, indigenous and cultures on the periphery, or that are equity deserving of not, or indigenous non-Western cultures, social engagement is part of the fabric of their culture. So, give an example of Ishil's case study of using the space. In many spaces, in many cultures, there is the use of the marketplace as the place where communities come together, or for Manji, where activism within really people coming together to speak about a certain issue and all of that. So I wonder, Begüm, if you want to kind of just reflect on that, what would that look like? What might that offer us? And maybe for Minji and Charles and Ishil, really thinking about, based on your experiences. I know, Minji, you talked about the fact that legal doesn't mean that it's just, and in what ways are these different interventions changing the narrative in Korea? And I think, again, from listening to the city, we've heard a lot about how about their work in Seoul and what that is changing. So just wonder if you could speak more to that. And then to see, really thinking about that space, what has been the implication of your intervention with your community, with your collaborators, and how has that really offer opportunity to rethink the use of space within that university and perhaps beyond? And then for Charles, I know you kind of moved between Lagos and New York. For you, within your own practice, how the peculiarity of both cities, how do they really weave through your own narrative? So I've kind of gone round, kind of giving questions so that I don't interrupt the four of you, because I think your presentation kind of move into each other. So if we could go in that order, from Begüm to Minji to Ishil and then to Charles, and then I'll offer back to Denise if she's got any further question. Over to you, Begüm.
Yeah, Taiwo, thank you so much. Before I start answering your question, well, try and answer your question. I would like, I'm so impressed by Ishil's project, let's say, because it's such a great metaphor of what Germany is in terms of arts and culture, and what institutions want from artists. It's like a super metaphor of what is allowed, right? Growing wild plants in artificial plant beds. It's like I take it as a critique of what institutions allow, like migrants, radical art, to be very much limited, but you can still grow wild plants, but not on the ground. The ground is not for you. It's like it's such a great metaphor for that. Yeah, so the question is super difficult for me to answer, because I do not really know about specific examples, or like I'm not familiar with the like decolonial context. But like I would maybe emphasize that when I talk about like socially engaged art, I am specifically referring to a certain discourse and practice that emerged during the 90s within very much actually Western context, which then sort of traveled to its outside and took different shapes and forms and created different institutions and practice. So what I try to do is like to show how this this discourse of socially engaged art and its practice traveled outside of the West, or the, let's say, like global North, and like how it transformed, how the discourse and the context has changed. So I am trying to like what I mean socially engaged art. I usually have this like practices where the artist, as an outsider, goes to a certain community and try to create processes of like artistic engagement within the community and strengthen the community. This is, I think, the mainstream of like socially engaged art. So like I specifically try to put those kind of practices, which is interestingly, now Işıl probably will know much better than me. In Turkey, there is there is hardly any such practices are alive nowadays, right? This kind of socially engaged art is done and over with within this given context. So like I am sure and I know that there are different practices that we can call like socially engaged art where you don't even need an artist to practice it. And maybe the colonial perspective, like focusing on this practice and critique from the colonial, not only geographies but also perspectives, can, I don't know, make my like very provocative, I know, analysis more layered. But I would I will stop myself from answering from a perspective that I am not very familiar with. I can only just, maybe repeat some very well-known arguments, but I refrain from doing that.
No, thank you. Thank you so much. I think you've also kind of layered your analysis already by even recognizing those existing practices that are not necessarily within your own purview, which is really great. It kind of layers it already to know that there are possibilities and
of course,
involved already. So thank you for that, Bertram. I know that we'll follow-up question, but I want to ensure that everybody goes around. So Minji, over to you, and then we'll come to Issy, and then we'll come to Charles.
I was muted. Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much for the question. Yeah. So as I just briefly mentioned in the presentation, so Derrida, he actually differentiated like law from justice, right? And argued there that law is inherently limited and must be deconstructed to reveal its biases or like exclusions. So so the corporate entity in Ritiro Banson, so they legally follow the law, and in refusing to renew the lease and in executing the forced eviction. So I also understood it. But in this case, I think listen to the city's recent activism. It's not simply about contesting legal rulings. So they try to redefine what justice should mean in this context, especially with this urban redevelopment and gentrification in Seoul's context, by asserting that the rights of communities to cultural memory and urban belongings and everything. So so when I first knew about this case, this protest, I think it actually pushed us to consider how spatial justice is not just about laws, but infrastructure, but also about memory and performance and effect as well. So it added to these days, especially in Korean scholarship, and how marginalized groups reclaim agencies for creativity and collective embodiment. So yeah, so I think that's quite one of the most fascinating aspects of the case. Yeah, so the protest is being operated in a legal gray zone, I say. So they were permitted by the Seoul metropolitan government, but actually in their message is very subversive. So this yeah, like the way of balancing between the two extreme concepts is quite fascinating to me.
Interesting. Thanks, Benji. I know Benjamin talked about the neoliberal practices and realities in which social engaged arts really operate, and it's really interesting to see how listening to the city and other partners came together to kind of weave something out. Right, the land doesn't belong to us. Going back to Isil's metaphor, but we're putting it in. We're putting the root in a temporary, in a space, even though this land, it's clearly, we've been told that it doesn't belong to us, but we're finding a way around that. So thank you for that. I want to come to Isil. We're going back to your metaphor here. So back to you, to Isil, for your thought, and then to Charles.
Yeah, all right. So thank you, Begüm. I'm gonna start with Begüm's comment then, like how to actually negotiate with institutions, because I think as artists, one thing we can do is the skill of negotiation as a strategy. Yeah, because it's too easy to see ourselves as the victims of this situation. Okay, I'm being boxed, or it's also one way to look at it is a step. And the way I think street smartly about it is, and it actually happened, that those plants are jumping from the boxes and they are already out on the ground. Okay, maybe in the beginning it looks like we have the boxes, but they are jumping. There are rabbits there, there are birds there. It's impossible to stay in the box. Just like as we are as the community there, we're also growing. The plants are growing, the weeds are growing. And so I think, it's important to be able to use negotiation as a strategy, and then how to move from that, because I think that's the way, at least in my practice, this is how I find also, of course, protecting my boundaries and my students' boundaries, and like our original idea as well, but also somehow allying the institution into this. So coming from that, about our relationship with the institution and how it is seen now. Of course, we were in the beginning, how should I say it? In Germany, I say this also. In Germany, there's not a culture of appreciation. Nobody has come to me and told me how great work I have done or something like that. But there's something called silent approval, which is basically not saying anything is a good thing. So I have got the silent approval of the university, but also now they have it on their website as an example of their artistic research project. So, and the president showcases us as a, like when they have visitors, so things like that. And we have become visible, and as the other garden, we have been recognized, and of course that is nice. But for me, the most important thing in this case is transforming the institution, transforming my own pedagogy, my understanding of knowledge production, because we are really doing practice-based knowledge production there without having a goal. And most of the time I'm also experimenting with the students, like I said, through different artistic methods, and using them as our research through practices of every day, such as the cooking together, crocheting together, making Christmas cards together, these simple acts. But how do we come together around that? And then we find different ways of engaging and talking with each other, talking with the artists that we invite, talking with the neighborhood. and I don't know where it will lead to. We don't have this. It just happened so far so organically that, like I said in my talk, I'm not even present there all the sessions now. We are running it, co-facilitating with the students. So every week is led by another or two students also. So it is becoming its own thing. And yeah, I'm in this way of observing where it goes.
Thank you, Shil.
Yeah.
Really great intervention. And wow, it's good that the university is recognizing that, even though you have to go through layers and layers of bureaucracy. And that's our reality as artists many times, especially when we want to do something that it's unconventional or the system thinks it's not necessarily what they agree with. They give you have to jump through multiple hurdles. But then the moment it's paints them well, paints them good, then they come back and then start giving you those levels of approval. But most importantly, also the fact that that's also transforming your pedagogy. You start from yourself, and then to community, which is really interesting. I want to come to Charles. Back to my question with you. You try navigating, and you give us, this in one of your slides. You had these three things around activism. I'm trying to remember the second one, and then there is community engagement or something like that.
And empowerment.
And empowerment. How do you, again, it sounds like that's sort of like your framework for you and your theater organization, navigating Lagos, because you're situated in two specific global cities here, in a practical sense, and your storytelling as a strategy for you. How do you navigate that?
I'm going to also segue from the last thing that you said about Isil's project, that about something she said about negotiating. There's a sort of conflict that exists between there's a sort of conflict that the African finds when you move to the US, even though there are a lot of similarities. But the thing about conflict is it's negotiable. Problem, however, is you do not come to the negotiating table with victimhood. It holds no value there. You come to the negotiating table with value. So being an artist from Nigeria and being an artist working currently in the US as well, that has been my central core, or my foundation to navigate these spaces has been finding the similarities between both spaces and then building on those similarities. Now, you come here and you see the rich, you see the rich cultural heritage that the African American has here, and how they have worked tirelessly. The civil rights movement, I mean, for every single blockade they've had to overcome through struggle, through protest. They've had to work very hard to be where they are today. Coming here as an African, these are my forebears. These are people who have paved the road for us here today. And what we do is not to look at that from a perspective of someone who comes here seeking opportunity, but someone who comes here as a partner, somebody who is coming here in solidarity to remind you of your rich African heritage and say, listen, I see what you're doing. This is where the strength comes from. This is what you have been. Like I said, it's coming here to tell the story of who we were, who we currently are, and the potential for who we can be. So for me, it's always been about that. Navigating both cities is getting the stories from home, bringing it here to the wider diaspora, and letting the individuals here know that, listen, we are strong, we are great, we come from great heritage, rich heritage, and this is what we can become in the future going forward. I'd also like to take a little bit of, I think for me personally, it's been, I'll borrow from what Isil said at the beginning, having a brick wall. And if I was going to term Isil's presentation, it would be from the brick wall to the garden, where you come to a place where it's so hard And then somehow in between there, you create a nurturing ground, not just for yourself, for your ideas, but for also the people around you and the lives you affect. So for me, coming from that to this, from navigating between Lagos and the US and the work that we do on both ends, it's finding the similarities and building on that for me.
Finding similarities and building on that. I want to turn to the audience. If there are questions, I'm checking the chat. There's no question yet, but for those that are here, if you have any question, please feel free to either raise your hand or put it in the chat. Happy to get onto. Yes, I can see Roland now. So thanks, Charles, for that. Finding similarities and building on that, particularly how you navigate Lagos and New York as an artist for your work. Roland, I want to come to you. You have a question, and good to see you. How are you doing today?
Yeah, good to see you as well. Thank you for letting me be on this call, and thank you to all the presenters. Really, really interesting conversation, and I learned a lot. I have a question specifically for Begüm and Işil. I was just wondering, in terms of your thinking around hierarchy and institution and this relationship between the artist and the institution, especially in participatory works and public works, how do you navigate the kind of inherent hierarchy between artist and participant when you make public work, when you make participatory or performance work? And in terms of community-related work, when does community then kind of cross the line over into institution? Because there is, I imagine, an inherent difference, but institution and community are actually in some ways interacting all at the same time. When a community gets big enough, it can very easily cross into the level of institution or institutional power. So I'm wondering how you're thinking about these different questions. And if anyone else has any thoughts about that, I'd love to hear that as well.
Thanks, Roland. And yeah, I know he mentioned Begüm and Işil, but for Minji and Charles, if again, I know you also you navigate this within your own
absolutely, please.
I think the question is not for me, but Işil and Charles as practitioners. Yeah.
Işil,
Thank you. Yeah, I can start. Yeah, well, I'm gonna give an example. Of course, I mean these like the democratization of roles, the hierarchies have been something that I have thought about for a long time, researched and wrote about, and practice also. And as you use the word inherent, there are some inherent, characteristics there that are like we cannot ignore them and pretend it's not there. So I come to this project as the artist and the pedagogue and the teacher. And I know my students have come there as the students. I'm using it now because I gave that example, but I've done many. I worked with coal miners. I worked with shop owners in a specific neighborhood in Turkey, coal miners in Germany, refugee boys in Germany who came here without paper, with women. So many different groups. The example I wanted to give you, my teacher, when I studied 20 years ago, one of my advisors, she told me like why, and it stuck with me. She said, why do artists, they feel this do good, right? Why do we embrace this do good role and always work with marginalized communities? Yeah, marginalized in a quotation marks. She told me to try to work with a group of privileged, women or bankers and see how that would actually work. And then I would perhaps faced with some specific entitlement there and like rethink my role. And then it started making me think, like what is this? And it maybe ties into Begüm's talk at a further level that what is this role of art or an artist, as also Claire Bishop talks about, this like Christ-like role that we play on also is the saviors, right? So just as a question, I put it there. Let's bring it to the practice, and I will stop. in my practice, how I try to work with it, around it is, yeah, just really I call it, as I said, dialogue-based practice. I think it is really coming from how you create this dialogue, from what kind of language you're how do you talk to people? Really, really specific, the basic questions, talking to them about everyday things, talking to them about my life, my vulnerability, my fears. Also, I do that in the beginning of the class, that I tell them like how nervous I feel asking them to bring a yoga mat to the class, and like speaking in a circle format. So my kind of I open up also my fear and anxieties in creating this. We talk about everyday things, and I think those kind of everydayness and the simpleness in the language, not necessarily making it naive, but really bringing yourself as a person there, not as an artist, not as a teacher, and making a relationship there is a beginning of a starting of a really like an honest dialogue. That's how I move on from there.
And Charles, thanks, Cecilia, because you're talking about relationality and relationship and connection, because good intention is not enough, and the ethics of really breaking that savior mental, mindset. Charles, do you want to speak to again? I know more of your context in Lagos and New York. Do you want to speak to that question, maybe in terms of how you navigate those hierarchies, and how you invite those audience to how you build those relationships in the work and with the theater organization, the theater company, how you build those relationships, because I think that's where the power of that storytelling really comes to life.
I think that first of all, like Sil said, you should come as yourself. I'm coming from this as from the point of an actor, from the point of an artistic director, from the point of an artist, to come and, that's what I'm coming to the table with. And like I said earlier on, you don't negotiate with victimhood, you negotiate with value. How do you get there? Like Isil said again, I will also model that, is you model vulnerability. You show yourself the way you are plain, you create a safe space where they can also drop their own guards down. Because at the end of the day, people are first people before they're anything else. They might be the director of a parastatal you're trying to get into. They might be the president but they're first people before they're any of those things. And if you want to navigate those spaces, you first start by coming as yourself, coming with the value that you have to offer, and then also coming to those spaces and modeling vulnerability. That way, they not only see that the problem at hand, it's not just something that they have to deal with, it's something that you also identify with, finding common ground, coming there with the values that you can bring to move forward with these issues that they're having. And then also then showing them that this is something that also you would like to partner on.
Thanks, Charles. I know that Theater for Development, part of the issues that he had was that it was always this idea of parachuting into communities, into cities, somebody having power over it. They feel like they're the one that will help, and all of that. And that strategy really collapsed. My last question here, and I'll pass it to Denise for comments and questions. Minji, in your working career, are there tactics? I know that Michel de Saussure talks about tactics and strategy. And are there tactics and strategy in everyday navigation that whether it's listen to the city or other organizations that are coming to really engage in this collective collective work, they are engaging, that you want to share that that you've seen over the years in your engagement and interaction with them, if there is any you want to share with us, because I think that the working career, and particularly in the spaces that listen to city and other organizations and artists where they work, they are really speaking to urban issues, just like every other person here, but maybe there are tactics and strategy in addition to what Charles and Isil and Begüm they've talked about that you also want to add to that.
Yeah, Yeah, thank you for another amazing question. Yeah, I mean, listening to the city, of course, the collective occupies a unique position between artistic practice and direct activism in Korea currently. But I think a useful comparison is Ogin Collective, also Seoul-based, another artist group that emerged around the same period. And they also employed similar strategies of urban interventions, I'd say, namely walking tours. But unlike Listen to the City, this collective is no longer active. Whereas Listen to the City, they have maintained its engagement by continuously adapting its new strategies for the urban challenges, not just with the protests or workshops, but also publication and online activism through website. Yeah, so I think another example will be Ogin Collective, and as you mentioned, Michelle de Seto's strategies. So yeah, but I'd say the most provocative artist collective in terms of urban gentrification and redevelopment perspective is Listen to the City.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I think you've kind of also mentioned some of those things that they're using, publication, their webs, their online engagement, and really doing the activism in that holistic sense. Really great. Thanks for Roland's question. I want to pass it to Denise for comments and questions, and then we'll wrap things up with checking out time here.
Yeah,
Denise,
thank you, Taiwo, and thank you everyone for the comments. I think I'd like to ask a question, and maybe this is like a question and final remarks to Begüm, because I'm really inspired with the picture you draw, the sociological analysis of socially engaged art practices you have given. And there is really a challenge for collective action, for collective transformation, in the absence of this cross-identity, cross-class coalitions, without being subsumed into a hegemonic populist discourse, whether it is a moralized definition of community or society, or it's a legal discourse, or, it's a typical representation of an identity. So what is the direction for socially engaged arts? Is this a methodology problem? Is this an ontological problem? I mean, I understand it needs to be responsive to political context, power dynamics, language that constantly changes. What is the methodology for socially engaged arts as we go through these challenging populist, authoritarian, oppressive times? I think everywhere, more in some places than others.
Well, this is a challenging question. I can only say that, I will do the same presentation, same talk, taking away the socially engaged art and putting in socially engaged social sciences. Or socially engaged activism or community activism. So I think this is not a question that is specific for practices of socially engaged art. It has wider reach. There is a crisis in how we produce knowledge, how we create communities. So we are going through some sort of I don't want to be prophetical, but it's clear that there is a rupture, and it's a world historical rupture, and it's not just started now, but it has been there at least from 1960s on. So we are in this period of crisis where the whole neoliberal system is in crisis, but also social movements, social given critical activist modes of doing social science is also in crisis. So this is a fruitful crisis, I think. How do we sustain creating radical knowledge, How do we create like liberating communities? How do we challenge, you know, like authoritarian politics? These are all new questions for us on the table. I mean, this is the crisis of social movements as well, or political movements as well. So we are all, in a sense, searching for a new organizational form, you know, new forms of doing stuff, new pedagogies as well. So I don't know like what the answer is, obviously, but I know that this search for a form is an aesthetic search or also a political search. They cannot be separated from one another. And it's like, and this search goes on in very different or maybe multiple sides of like arts, like community arts, not only like maybe socially engaged art, but in the like art institutions are in crisis as well. So, you know, the academia is in a crisis. So it's like, you know, it seems like it's very draining, but at the same time, it's like, you know, a great time to begin asking questions again. I really don't know the answers. How could I know, you know? But it's a collective search, I believe.
Yeah, I like that hopeful, you know,
I
tone,
hope so.
and I think that's what we need, right? So it's a constructive destruction or destructive construction. I'm not sure which one, but yeah, we're, I think, approaching with this global context, with the relationality, the systems view, everything is connected to each other. Like socially engaged art is not in a different universe. It's part of our everyday lives, economy, politics, culture wars, everything. So, well, thank you everyone for your contributions. It was really important and interesting to listen to your work. We touched from sociology to arts to, you know, pedagogy, theater, of course, and so we're so lucky to have you here. And thank you to CSET, to Taiwo, Tara, and the big team behind there. And thank you for joining us today. Everybody have a good day, night, wherever
Thank
you are.
you. Thank you so much. Bye,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.